Coming to you from beautiful Merrifield, Virginia, right next to the Merrifield Multiplex, where I believe the Amityville Horror will probably be playing this weekend, Jeff.
Only this weekend, probably.
Only this weekend. It's the Fairfax Sports Report. My name is Greg Wyshynski of the Connection Newspapers, Jeff Graham of the Connection Newspapers, and our special guest this evening, Paul Fisher, head coach for Robinson Varsity Tennis. We have a lot to talk about on the show this evening. Some very interesting developments in the tennis community this year, which I think you'll very, very much enjoy. But before we get to that, let's thank the people who make it possible to have this show brought to you every week. We're talking, of course, about the Underwriters, Quality Care Ford Service Center, conveniently located in Fairfax, servicing all makes and models, 703-383-6299. And our friends at CCI Screen Printing for all of your screen printing needs, Jeff Graham, 703-978-0257. Absolutely. Amen to that. We've got to get into some stuff before we get to the tennis, because it's been a very, very busy and interesting week in the world of Northern Region sports.
Some signings, some fightings.
Some fightings and all sorts of things. Let's start with the fight.
Okay. We're not talking Mike Tyson.
We're not talking Mike Tyson fighting a big Irish guy for some reason.
Right.
In case you haven't heard, there was an incident at the Lake Braddock Robinson boys lacrosse game last night, on Tuesday night, we should say, where in the fourth period, with about 5 minutes left, a pushing, shoving match between the Robinson goalie and a Lake Braddock forward turned into a wrestling match, which turned into all the players in the field converging behind the Robinson goal to try to break up the fight, which then led to one of the cardinal sins in team sports in high school or any level.
Do not leave the bench.
Do not leave the bench. If you learn nothing from Pacers Pistons, it's do not leave the bench. Robinson players, a number of them left the bench, joined the fight. Lake Braddock players, for the most part, stayed on the bench, or at least if they came off the bench, they didn't run and join the fracas.
Right.
So the aftermath is this. After a lengthy delay in the match, they decided to call the game. Lake Braddock, which was up 9-5 at that point, wound up winning the match for the first time in 15 years, beating Robinson. And then today, Wednesday afternoon, we find out that 10 players on Robinson's team have been suspended. You have, I believe, a couple of players that have been suspended for multiple games. One player went for 2. I think 3 players went for 3. And there's one player who, upon looking back at the videotape, they found out he threw a punch. He's gone for 4 games. Okay. And then one player, the player who was directly involved in the shoving match with the goalie on Lake Braddock, has been suspended for a game, according to Robinson's athletic department. So what we have is a real mess, and you hate to see it. And I was at the game last night, and really was something I didn't expect to happen, and really something that I've never seen before in 5 years.
Yeah, it's probably not something you're going to see happen on the high school level.
Yeah.
Boys lacrosse is kind of like hockey in the respect. I mean, you have the sticks, you have the the cages, and like in hockey, when your goaltender is bumped, hit, players are going to come to to his defense. He's kind of that player that's kind of in that prone position, and and that's kind of what happened. I'm assuming on the field, but like you said, Robinson broke the cardinal rule: don't leave the bench. And that one I have to put on the coaching staff. If coaching staffs have to, I mean, I'm sure they're not going into every game telling there could be a fight. Don't leave the bench, but that's got to be something that I think comes from the top.
And that's a good point. I should say, let's be honest here. You have to give a lot of credit to Director of Student Activities Mike McGurk and the rest of the Robinson athletic department, because they did a heck of a job today, really coming down, nipping this in the bud, doling out suspensions, really making a statement that this is not going to be tolerated, that it makes the school look bad when this happens. And we're talking less than 24 hours after the incident. They looked at the videotape, they picked out the kids, and they went into action. And you got to give them credit for that. That's fantastic. And Mr. McGurk, Mark Martino, the DSA at Lake Braddock, Principal Dan Meyer from Robinson. Those were some of the first guys to run out on the field and try to break this thing up.
And it's funny that they were there. I mean, it could have been a situation where really maybe there was an assistant AD. That's it.
Yeah.
And they had videotape of the whole thing. So it was.
About the coaches, though, Mr. McGurk did mention that there might be some repercussions to come down on the coaches because of this incident. Being there, I'll say this about the officials. They definitely were calling some of the rough stuff, and they were doing a good job of it. I think you and I have both seen situations where games get out of hand because the officials put their whistles away. Right. Well, these guys were calling things, but when the what hit the fan between the goalie and the kid from Braddock, the referees didn't do enough to break that thing up real quick.
Right.
And there was a lot of standing around. I think they were kind of stunned at the way this thing was kind of coming
Well,
together.
I mean, they were probably stunned, and I'm sure part of them didn't want to get hit with an elbow or a stick or a masks flying off. Or something
and really, honestly, I mean, when you're talking about fights in sports, I think you and I have both seen an elbow in basketball or a stick to the face in some sports. But if you're wearing gloves and you're attacking a kid in full pads and a helmet, how effective are you planning to be in a fight? I mean, it's just sort of silly when you think about it. But it was a very ugly situation, and it's unfortunate that it had to happen between these two teams, because for the first time in a lot of years, the playing field was sort of level between these programs, and it was a very competitive game. And Braddock looked like they were on their way to a win, but you never know with 5 minutes left. And it's just a shame that such a historic and momentous occasion for the Bruins program had to kind of be sullied by winning it in that manner.
I mean, like you were saying, Robinson had won, I guess, 15 straight games, and new coach David Guetta takes over for Robinson this year. So this isn't something that he's going to want to have, mar this season.
Right.
So,
but we've seen in years past, teams that have to deal with suspensions and things like that in the spring during the regular season. I mean, you look at W.T. Woodson last year had to deal with some of that stuff for different reasons, completely different reasons.
West Springfield a couple years back won a boys state title after making a couple suspensions.
And you go through that. Sometimes it brings you together as a team, and sometimes you go on to bigger and better things after that. But from a strictly from an observational perspective, last night, I mean, it was a complete mess. But less than 24 hours later, I think it was handled in a complete professional and in an effective way by Robinson, and you got to give him kudos for that.
I know you were talking about some of the coaching staff maybe getting a little overboard on the sidelines, braiding.
Some of the folks in the stands were kind of talking a little bit last night about some of the coaches on Robinson's staff overreacting to calls and things like that, and I saw a little bit of that. But it's Mark Wade, the goalie for Braddock, I think said it best. It's Lake Braddock Robinson. It's one of the biggest and baddest rivalries in Northern Region sports. And anytime you get those two teams on a field in a competitive game, no matter what the sport is, and I've seen it happen in a girls' soccer game, it's going to get physical, it's going to get nasty, and in this instance, it just crossed the line.
And this is the final time that they're going to be playing as, I guess, district competitors.
Yeah, in the regular season, that's probably true. Yeah,
they wanted to get that last punch in.
So that was an interesting situation, and hopefully the last time we see that in the spring. Another big story broke last night, I understand, about Mr. Scotty Reynolds with the Herndon basketball program.
Yep, Scotty's, I guess, decided to go to Oklahoma University and join Kelvin Sampson's crew out there. I think that, talking to Gary Hall earlier this season during basketball season, Scotty was leaning that way for most of the year. I think he had some offers, some interest from some other big schools, Michigan, North Carolina State. But I mean, this is the place he wanted to go. He said it was a family atmosphere when he took his visit out there. So it's going to be interesting. It's great to see a kid from here go to such a high-profile program.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how much playing time he gets early on, and what I mean, a prolific point scorer in high school. I mean, I'm sure the college level is gonna provide a different challenge for him. But I mean, he's definitely a star. And
you've covered Scotty for a few years now. I want to ask you this: did you think that this decision was going to happen as early as it happened, or did you think that this might be a decision that comes a little bit closer to next season for him?
Well, just because of the amount of interest in him, there must have been at least 24 schools making serious offers to him, and I just. Coming off an injury, he would like to get this decision out of the way, so he has, going to his senior year, he's nothing to worry about. He's gonna be breaking a bunch of records next year, scoring records. So I mean, if he knows where he wants to go, might as well get that decision out of the way.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, busy week news-wise. It's been kind of an interesting week, and as we make the awkward transition to our wonderful guest, Paul Fisher from the Robinson Tennis Program. It's been sort of an interesting year for tennis in the Northern Region and throughout Virginia. Yes. Obviously, we're talking about the fact that they plucked girls' tennis in the fall, moved it to the spring for the first time this year. Talk a little bit about this whole process. I mean, you and a lot of your peers in the Northern Region especially were very vocal when this whole thing started to break last year. In regards to not moving girls' tennis to the spring. First of all, were you ever surprised that it actually happened? Did you think at one point that it would not happen?
Well, the original vote by VHSL was to put the girls in the fall and the boys in the spring, as it was. So, yeah, we thought we'd won, and I guess maybe we sat back on our laurels, and then there was a flurry of emails and letters from Loudoun County and several other places in the state, a small but vocal group, and they convinced enough people to reverse the vote. I don't know, it might have been 2 months later.
Yeah.
So, and at that point, none of us knew it was coming up again.
Right.
We had already,
Right.
thought we had won our battle, and they caught us unaware.
And this whole, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this whole thing kind of stems from almost a preventive strike the state was taking in regards to a Title IX settlement that came down a few years back regarding girls basketball. And this was something where they felt they needed to do this because they felt they were susceptible to some future lawsuits, correct?
That's my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they had lost a suit. They had to pay out in excess of $100,000 is my understanding.
Right.
And they did not want to put more money into an appeal process, and they were afraid that they would lose, and so I think they were cutting their losses, so
Yeah.
to speak.
And having followed this story for a good year and a half now, the one thing that never really made sense to me is in the fall, the girls are choosing between tennis, volleyball, field hockey, and cross country.
Mm-hmm.
In the spring, they're choosing now between tennis, soccer, softball, lacrosse, outdoor track, crew. It would seem
Yeah.
logically
Right.
that there are a few more choices for these girls that are now being eliminated because tennis is in the spring than if tennis
Right.
was played in the fall. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yeah, the opportunities are more varied in the spring, so you're going to have more competition for those athletes. The smaller schools have a limited number of female athletes, and with more sports competing for those athletes, it just, to me, made more sense to be in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way it goes.
And I mean, I guess as far as playing conditions and weather, we were talking before the show that, I mean, just sunlight, the daytime. Obviously, it's been a pretty cold, March and April. Do you think that the quality of tennis is better when it was played in the fall, as far as
Yeah.
just being able to? I mean, you're
Yes,
not dealing
well,
with as
I
much
mean,
wind.
there are a number of different things go into that.
Right.
Number one, weather. We started in August 5th
Right.
or so, like
Right.
that. So basically, we had them almost a month before they went to school. You could practice, compete, and basically that was their concentration. They didn't have to worry about going to school. I know kind of the week before school, they started doing things there was activities
Right.
and stuff like that, and back to school. But you really could form a team at that point. The weather obviously was much better. You had nice warm weather. You could work on your tans. I always took my team. I mean, at least for the last 4, 5, 6 years, whatever. We went to Delaware to the Bethany Beach for a few days of tennis camp, and then they also got to go to the beach and
Right.
have a nice time to bond, and so this is in contrast to this spring, which I mean, the temperature rarely got out of the 40s, windy, cold. It's just been really unfortunate
Yeah.
weather conditions that we've had to deal with this particular year.
One of the things about this decision that irked me was the fact that it didn't seem to take into account the effect on the coaching community. Now, you are someone who, and we joked about it before the show, but it's sort of a dying breed. You're a guy who is the head coach for both programs. There's a bit more specialization, I think, in a lot of schools now, where there is a head boys coach and a head girls coach. But you kind of work it where you're the head coach for both, and you have an assistant that kind of handles one of the teams on a because
Right.
they're both playing on the same day. We
Right.
should probably make mention. what are from what you've heard from your peers, the war stories I'm sure that you've heard this spring, what are some of the impact, what has been the impact rather of this decision on the coaching community?
Well, I haven't talked to one coach who is like this.
Okay.
Number one, I think that we don't have enough time to spend with them, quality time. We're, stealing from one to do another. The court space is limited. Teams are doing it differently. Some I know are borrowing courts from clubs and that type of thing.
How have you handled the court space issue and also the daylight issue with your teams?
Well, we have divided we have two practices starting almost immediately after school. We've been going from 2:30 to 4 with the girls, and then I usually have the boys come in about 3:45, and they can do their off-court stretching, getting started. By that time, usually the girls we're down to 1 or 2 courts, so we can get started, and then I turn my attention to them at 4. So that's how we've been dealing with it. Now, other schools who have smaller squads have actually had them come at the same time and just split the courts 3 and 3 or something like that.
Right. Talking with some of the Arlington County coaches, because they get out of school later than the Fairfax County schools, they've had to, mix their practices, and like Paul was talking before the show, maybe they're not dealing with as great of a number of players as some of these kids. But did you ever think about maybe trying a practice at the same time, and what do you think the positives or negatives would be for that?
Well, my original plan was actually to divide both teams into a varsity and a JV.
Okay.
And have one. And I just use that term because I needed a term.
Right.
And have the two, the boys and girls JV and boys and girls varsity practice together.
Okay.
It really helps the top girls. In
Right.
my case, I have several talented girls that hitting with the boys is almost necessary.
Right.
It just, as I got into it, I realized, I need these girls for challenges and that, working on doubles and that type of thing. So. But I have now started my top 2 girls, having them come with the boys.
Oh wow! Really?
At most practices. So because it helps them.
I've talked with some of the top girls, and they've said, just like Paul said, they enjoy hitting with the boys because most of the times they're only going to get their top challenges by playing the other team's number 1. They're not going to get it from a number 2. Right. So they've really enjoyed playing with the boys.
Yeah, for the top girls, I think it's a big plus.
Yeah, I'm glad this is working out for somebody, huh?
Yeah.
I want to ask you. I remember back when this story broke last year, one of the real bones of contention was the fact that you might have to cut down the rosters, and it might be a case where you couldn't work with the number of kids that you had to work with in the fall because you simply don't have the eyes to follow these kids during a practice or during a game. Have you been able to have you been having to make? Let me try this again. Did you have to make any cuts?
Yes, I had to make cuts, but I have maintained the size of my rosters. One of my practices has been to be loyal to my kids who have played, and if they're working at their game, I want to keep them on the squad, whether they're going to play or not. I just think loyalty goes 2 ways. So we have maintained. I have 19 boys and 17 girls. So we are, but the quality of time that I can dedicate is really quite short. I do have with the girls, I do have an assistant, and he can take a certain amount of girls, and but you're trying to orchestrate this whole thing and watching 6 different courts and 17 girls running around. It's hard to really pinpoint and deal with 1 or 2 or 3 in that situation.
Did the change in season have any effect on? schools looking for tennis coaches is sort of the norm. I mean, every time we look at the Supergram from the county, there's inevitably one school or two that are still looking for tennis coaches during the off season. I think Falls Church might have hired theirs about 20 seconds before the season started. But the change in season, do you think it's going to have an effect down the road insofar as people that are in your position as far as working for a club but also coaching high school tennis? I mean, is the spring a tougher season to find people to coach high school tennis, or do you think it's going to be a little bit easier than trying to find somebody in the fall?
Actually, I think it might be a little bit easier because in a club situation, you have the kids are going to the high school, so they're not in the clubs on a daily basis. And so there might be, actually, I was talking to the Hayfield coach. We played Hayfield today, and I was talking to an assistant, but he said the head coach is from Annandale Sport and Health. I haven't met him, but so it might be possible that you get a little bit more involvement from that angle. I would wait on that to see what happens.
Exactly.
I mean, I know talking with some coaches, one coach in particular really said to me that they're really going to have to think about whether they want to continue to do it this way, not being able to run a program like they want to.
Well, I can say I've been at Robinson now 13 years. I've been very fortunate to be there that long. About a month ago, maybe not even, for the first time, I think in that space, I said, I don't know if I can do this any longer. It's just, I mean, you have 38 kids now, paperwork for 38 kids, trying to get uniforms for 38 kids as opposed to half of that amount. It's been very difficult. A lot more, you the time you spend.
Really?
Off the court.
Because usually it's, like what we've been talking about, it's split up between two seasons. Now you're talking about combining it all.
Right.
And people think coaches, they forget sometimes that there's a lot of stuff that happens away from holding a whistle on a court or a field. I mean, you got to do a whole bunch of stuff in the back room too. And that's got to be really an extraordinarily large change for you.
And I mean, not to mention that you were talking about the pay too. Really doesn't. I mean, doesn't it equal out to twice? Getting paid twice.
Well, for me, for somebody who's doing both,
right?
I mean, it's close to a 50% pay cut.
Wow.
I mean, it's large because they're not letting. Even though I deal with both boys and girls, I can only get one stipend, whereas I was getting.
Right.
Ain't that funny? It's funny how that works. Well, there you go. It's an interesting situation, and I'm sure years from now we'll be looking back at this season as either the beginning of a interesting experiment or maybe just the year all the kinks get worked out.
And it'll be interesting to see how many the coaches that have been here for a long time. And tennis has been a sport, kind of some like golf or some sport that a lot of the schools get the coaches for 1 or 2 years, then then a new coach comes in, then a new coach comes in, just because they shuffle in and out. And I mean, and if you have the veteran coaches saying, I don't know if I can do this, then the fringe coaches, I mean that kind of speaks for itself, I would say.
Absolutely. Switching gears for a second, I want to ask you. You've been in the region. You've been coaching Robinson for 13 years, is it?
Yeah.
Who is the best male, best female player you've seen come through? Not necessarily from your school, but just overall in the region.
In 13 years?
Yeah.
Girls, I think without a doubt it's Katie Rucker.
Yeah. From Madison.
Well, she started at Robinson.
Oh, did she really?
And Katie and I still have a relationship. I mean, winning three state titles.
Yeah.
Ironically, she plays at the University of Texas now, and she was playing another girl who played at Centerville.
Oh, really?
At the same time. She just played when Colorado and Texas played.
Huh.
She played another girl. But 3 state championships. She was a tremendous player. Tremendous player. Boys, there's been a couple. I mean, my own Ramez Quamer.
What year was he? When did he graduate?
He graduated in '99. He won the state championship his freshman year in '96. David Emery has won 2 state titles for Woodson. Um, uh, Michael James from
Oh, yeah.
Centerville has won two state titles. I'm not sure, of those three. I mean, they've all been very successful. I believe Ramez, from a USTA ranking situation, had a much higher ranking than the other two. But there have been several good players.
I mean, we've got some good ones this year on the girls' side. Jessica Keener and Laura Reichert, from Madison are tremendous. And I think the boys' side, probably a little bit more more wide open. Thomas Nolan, probably a pretty good candidate from Chantilly. So it'll be interesting to see how they match up this year.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. It's been a very enlightening conversation, no doubt, and hopefully everything continues to work well. How many regional titles have you won as head coach at Robinson?
4, 3 with boys and 1 with the girls.
And a bunch of district titles.
Yeah, one of the few. Well, either you or Braddock every year, right? But anyways, want to take a second to let everybody watching know about all of the exciting things happening here on the Fairfax Sports Network. We are talking, of course, about things such as the Fairfax High School Game of the Week, FSN and Cox Communications. Coming up, West Springfield at Lake Braddock. Games air Saturdays 5:30 and repeat every day at 5 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. on Cox 35. And next time on the Fairfax Sports Report, we will have more spring sports. Wednesdays at 10, Fridays at 12:30, and Cox Cable 10, of course. And of course, coming up, Jeff Graham, a new, fresh, exciting show hosted by our friend Joey Kamide. Inside Baseball, Thursdays at 8. I can only imagine the sort of hijinks and hilarity that show will
I
provide.
think I've heard of that host.
It's a fantastic idea. A show about baseball. There you go. Cox Cable 10 is the network. FSN on the web. www.fairfaxsportsnetwork.com. Thanks again to the underwriters who make this thing happen every week. Quality Care Ford Service Center, conveniently located in Fairfax, servicing all makes and models. 703-383-6299. And CCI Screen Printing for all of your screen printing needs. 703-978-0257. And with the time we have left, I suppose we should ask you, Paul, what does the Patriot District look like this year?
I don't mean to be cocky, but we have a very good team this year.
I think that's fair enough.
Wraps it up.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Join us next week for more fun and games on the Fairfax Sports Report. And yeah, well, absolutely. And hopefully good weather for the rest of the spring.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
All right.